So, if you're listening to this the day it comes out, it is the eve of Halloween, and I can't think of a better topic to have for this week's podcast than by discussing one of the greatest directors in the history of film, the great John Carpenter. And I couldn't think of three other people to join me for this special episode. First up, we have my co-host from the Nerd Cave Retro podcast, Mr. Jason Robbins. How are you, sir?
Doing great. How are you guys?
Doing good. Excited to be here. We also have you might recognize him as he filled in as host for me for the episodes we did for the feature, and I honestly thought about handing the podcast over to him. He did such a good job. Mr. Jeremy Branch, how are you?
I am doing well, Derek. I love that you introduced us as there was only three other people that you could think of, and not three better people. I see you, and I will get back at you at a later point in this stream.
I look forward to it. And of course, we have a producer from the feature, also The Walker, also returning guest, Mr. Chad Sanders. Chad, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well. My weekend just started. I just clocked out of work like an hour ago, so I'm ready to cast a pod about JC, man. Let's do it.
I need to send you the Daniel Craig gif where he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, the weekend."
Yeah.
I would be feeling that right about now, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, John Carpenter, one of, in my opinion, I'm sure you guys will agree, one of the most iconic directors to ever direct, also writer, composer. He's done a lot in the world of film. And Jeremy, we'll start with you. Do you remember the first John Carpenter film that you ever saw or when you were introduced to his work?
I wore it out, and I do remember what the first one was, and I don't think it's the movie that most people would probably say. The first John Carpenter movie I saw was Blank, but I saw Big Trouble in Little China before I'd seen Escape from New York. I saw it before I saw Halloween, of course, which I actually didn't see till a little bit later. But yeah, I remember seeing Big Trouble in Little China as maybe a 6 or 7 year old and just absolutely loving it. It's a weird, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it, but like this mashup of mysticism and the martial arts film and Western actioners. And it's just a really cool mashup of different genres. And really, like, a lot of the iconography from Mortal Kombat, including like Raiden himself, really started with this movie. So I absolutely love Big Trouble in Little China, and remember watching that movie just on a VHS on repeat over and over and over again. And still to this day, Jack Burton's just such an iconic and awesome character.
I should have grabbed it, but I have a Jack Burton pop that I have
nice.
over,
I was just
over
about
here.
to go grab it.
I want to get to that movie specifically here in a little bit, but Chad, same question.
Well, officially, the first John Carpenter movie I saw was Ghost of Mars.
Nice.
I didn't realize it was a John Carpenter movie because it was kind of just on TV in like a year or two after it was made. And it didn't really clock with me that it's John Carpenter, except for like at the end where it's like the iconic John Carpenter font pops up. Early on, there wasn't a lot until I got much older, and it's hard to tell because it all seems so nebulous. But like the first time I saw The Thing, that really just kicked me in the teeth and had a lasting impact in the sense of most things that frighten you have a lasting impact, to the point where that was a movie, if I did revisit it, I would have to be like, has it been long enough? It's only been about a year. I probably need another 2 years till I feel comfortable watching The Thing. Now it's a little bit easier, and I saw it when it got re-released last year in cinemas, and that was really good. But that Escape from New York early on, really get into, like, he's one of those great filmmakers that when you decide to get into film or to become a filmmaker and you like genre films, regardless of what the genre is, and you're a little bit quirky and you like weird ideas, he's right up your alley. Like the first time someone showed me They Live was
a good one.
Memorable moment. That's my favorite of his.
Jason?
The first I remember was I saw we were at like a family gathering at like my aunt's parent, like aunt by marriage, like her parents' house, and they had a laser disc player. And all of us kids, we were in the living room watching Escape from New York on laser disc, like back in the mid '80s. And I just remember loving that movie. But the biggest memory I have is we didn't have cable when I was a kid, and my grandparents had cable, and they had a HBO. So my grandfather used to tape a lot of stuff off of HBO for me, and he had this one tape that had Big Trouble in Little China on it, and I couldn't tell you how many times I watched that movie on VHS. I mean, it must have been every day for like 5 years at least when I was a kid. I mean, I wore that tape to shreds, and just have always loved his stuff growing up. Especially the '80s era John Carpenter. Like the '90s era is kind of hit or miss, but I think his best movie is in the '90s with In the Mouth of Madness. I think that's his best movie. But the '80s era John Carpenter, oh yeah,
Yeah.
he's got it back there.
Yeah, I got it back
But the '80s era John Carpenter is always going to be like, just almost every single movie he made in the '80s was just a classic.
Well, I think it's also fitting too because like the '80s I consider to be the best decade of film. John Carpenter's a big reason why, and you also had like Back to the Future, The Terminator, RoboCop, all these iconic movies that came out around that time. And I was not introduced to John Carpenter until I was in college and started taking like production classes. And a friend of mine, that I had classes with, he was like, "Hey, have you ever seen Big Trouble in Little China?" And I'm like, "What is that?" It sounds cool though. So we watched it and fell in love with that universe, even though I think Jack Burton might be the most useless protagonist to ever be made, but he is one of the most memorable.
Him and
Like if you think about it, he
Indiana
doesn't do anything.
It's the secret of the movie. He's pointless.
Well, it's the same with Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. If Indiana Jones wasn't there, the movie still would have happened the way it happened.
Interesting.
I got to
Yeah,
think.
I never thought about
I got to
that.
think about that one. That's interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to
What
go
would
back and
be-
watch that again.
You know what would be awesome though, and I always wished he would have done this, is to not remake Big Trouble in Little China, but make it his original vision of it being a Western. Like make it again, but make it an actual Western. Keep it separate from the original movie, but it would be the same thing. It would just be set, in like the Old West.
I didn't know that was a thing. That's really interesting. So it was supposed to be like a period accurate Western movie. Oh man, and Kurt Russell would have been so good for that role too. Look, I know we're all sitting here heaping praise on John Carpenter, but I feel like John Carpenter in my lifetime has been like most underrated, most overrated director of our day. I don't know, man. Maybe that's a super controversial take. I feel like he never aspired to be like this highbrow like filmmaker. Everything he's made has seemed like passion projects, but like it's all kind of cheesy. I feel like all you have to do to be a master of horror is just make one good horror movie. Like people call Tobe Hooper a master of horror, and that dude just fell into a good movie because nothing he's done since then has been good. Dario Argento, he had the 70s, man, but it's like the older they get, just the worse their freaking movies get. And I wonder, do we look at John Carpenter as being one of these super influential filmmakers because he made movies that hit us at the right time? Or do you think, and Derek, especially speaking to you, studying him in school, like, is he revolutionary? Is it like techniques and stuff that people are looking at? Or like, I'm trying to parse that.
I think what it is that you look at all these different directors and they're all different. Like they have their own different styles. Like Kevin Smith is my favorite director. His style is very different than like a Spielberg or a Scorsese. I think it just depends what type of movies you're into. Like if you like, it's like Chad was saying earlier, the little bit of quirkiness, because the genres of films that he's made is pretty large. Like he hasn't made just horror, but he's made like romance dramas, like with Starman. I don't know if you guys have seen that. I think that's one of his most underrated movies. It's more of a romantic dramedy that happens to have a sci-fi twist to it.
I think,
but go ahead.
I was going to say, like, the thing I think the most about John Carpenter is the guy knows how to set a tone and a mood that's very consistent, not only with his directing style, but he can take something that's cheesy. Like, you look at a movie like The Fog. It's cheesy, but it's utterly rewatchable a million times because the cinematography, that's one of the best shots movies you will ever see. Like that movie, the cinematography is gorgeous. He sets the tone with that cinematography, the music, and the actors that he picks. And there's something to be said, like for a guy, a director like that who has a stable of actors who constantly and consistently want to work with him on anything he does. Like look at Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell would be in every movie John Carpenter made if he would let him.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of, to touch on what Jason said, but also to piggyback off of what you were kind of getting at, Jeremy, was as a filmmaker, do people drawn to it? I think lately more people have been addressing his work because of how he makes movies. He makes two smart decisions. He's economical, as in he knows how to come in under budget, and he knows how to get the most bang for his buck. If he made a birdhouse out of if you made a birdhouse for $5, that's going to be a killer birdhouse. Like it's going to look like it's a $20 birdhouse. You won't believe it. And also just how he picks it. They're all high concept, which is great, and that's what makes them fun. They are silly. They are cheesy. Sometimes the budget influences who works on it. I revisited Prince of Darkness for this because it's been a minute, and it was involved in a pretty killer stash raid when I went to Action Movies and Games in Foley, Alabama. It's like an actual movie store that's still left standing, and they sell video games.
That's cool.
I got like 4 or 5 John Carpenter movies, and that was the one. And we rewatched it, and it was great. It's done in like 90 minutes. It's economical. It mostly takes place in one building. It's mostly just kind of a green tube of goo and some wet stuff, and a lot of shots that are upside down, making it look like there's a puddle in the ceiling. And got done watching it, and I loved it. I enjoyed it, but I also was aware of the quirks of it. Some of the acting is bad, just not good acting. Not all of it, but some of it is. And I asked my girlfriend what she thought. She's like, well, it's silly. And I'm like, she's absolutely correct. This is a silly movie, but I love it.
Yeah, but you look at some of the themes that he works with in his movies, and they're themes that are crazy how more relevant now some of his movies are than when they came out. Like, look at They Live.
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Relevant today than it was when it came out.
It's a documentary now, apparently. That's what everyone says.
No, that's actually a really good point. I agree with what y'all are saying. And when you look at Halloween, like he did kind of pioneer the use of the Steadicam that has gone on to become a fixture in genre filmmaking since that point. So like there are times that I can point to and say like that technique actually elevated an entire genre, and that's amazing. There was like a generation of filmmakers that include Adam Wingard, Ty West, a couple of these other guys that were kind of doing like mumble gore horror movies. The one in particular is The Guest, which had the dude that played Beast in Beauty and the Beast, Dan Stevens, in it. And it is just a straight up riff on John Carpenter. The red and blue motif, I feel like that kind of became a staple of the giallo genre, which is from the 1970s, which heavily informed what Carpenter was doing with Halloween. But I think it's interesting because I think some of his work is still underappreciated and underpraised, but in that same breath, ain't nobody talking about The Ward or Ghost of Mars or any of the stuff that came later in his career that you're just like, no, that objectively
I just
sucks.
mentioned Ghost of Mars. Come on.
I appreciate you bringing it up, actually. I'm glad you did.
That's exactly why I said, 80s era John Carpenter is all the hits. 90s era, you got basically his one best. I mean, Vampires came out in the 90s, but his one best movie was In the Mouth of Madness. And then after that, it was like he just gave the hell up. After he was.
I want to hear Chad talk about Vampires.
Is Vampires good?
No.
Okay. Are we can freely say that? I didn't want to say that, and then you guys are like, you're crazy.
This is what Vampires is a 90s cheese sandwich
It looks
of
like
a movie.
It should be on
Yes.
HBO. Looks like it should be like an HBO movie. Like, not quite a TV movie, but a little bit more of a budget.
It's one of those movies I won't go out of my way to watch, but if I'm clicking through and it's on, I'll watch it, but I'm not going to seek it out to watch.
You know how there are certain movies that you watch like 2 seconds of it and you can tell what decade it's in?
Yeah.
You watch the movie and you're like, that is totally a 90s movie.
Absolutely.
That is specifically
Absolutely.
1995 all over it. If it was made in
And it's
97,
early to mid 90s, they're so distinctive.
Yeah, it's a weird look.
It was post Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino doing From Dusk Till Dawn, and it felt like very much a riff on like Carpenter's gonna do a cool vampire movie. I actually rewatched it the other night in preparation for this, just because I'd seen it. I didn't really feel very compelled to watch it again, but I had a buddy that was like, oh, dude, John Carpenter's Vampires, that's the best one from the 90s. But I agree with you, Jason. It's In the Mouth of Madness.
Yeah.
I think that's his best 90s movie.
Yeah,
Without a doubt.
There's something about that movie that still creeps me out every time I watch it. That the whole like cosmic horror type of thing, like that's right up my alley, that type of stuff. Like I'm not really a blood and guts gore. Like I don't like movies like Saw and things like I don't like, gory movies like that. But when it comes to like cosmic horror or psychological horror, that's what I'm there for.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And what I think I like most about the original Halloween film, I'm with Jason in the sense that I don't like the gore aspect. But Halloween, when you think of like the cerebral type of horror film, just knowing that this Michael Myers character could be anywhere, and you're just thinking of that in the back of your mind, like, is this where he's going to show up? Is this where he's going to kill his next victim? And also, the thing that makes that movie just as importantly as the script and the characters is that theme song that John Carpenter wrote, because that movie would not be nearly as good if you didn't have that synthesizer type of soundtrack or that theme song.
Well, me and Jeremy, when did we have this conversation where we were talking about, I think it might have been on Open Micers, where we were talking about how John Carpenter is the godfather of synthwave.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think that's actually very valid, because when we think about like just the quintessential 80s synthesizer driven scores that so many people riff on even today, it is very rooted in what Carpenter was doing with Halloween, with The Fog. There were other examples of it. I think They Live. He departed a little bit with The Thing, which is also a very incredible score. He paired up with Ennio
Morricone?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just an incredible score. So like I think he puts a lot of love and care into making the scores for these movies as well, which is something that a lot of filmmakers don't do,
That's why I say he sets the tone and the mood, and it's all, 50% of it is music.
It's really good at being sparse, because he knows, back to that thing of economics, there's not a lot of blood in that movie. There's not, because they don't have it for the budget. That's a cheap movie. I rewatched it for this, and that's the one I go back to the least to rewatch. And I forgot how much happens in it. I forgot that after the titles, after the opening scene of the POV Panaglide shot that Brian De Palma owes a lot of thanks to, because he used that several times afterwards. It cuts to Dr. Loomis driving to the hospital for some reason, And that's how Michael escapes. You don't see anything but a couple dudes in gowns in the dark, and one on
Yeah.
top of a car. There's like no blood in the murder scenes because he can't afford it. And he has that. He's able to set the tone with the music and the timing of all the shots to really intuit in the idea that Michael is supernatural, probably. They don't say anything about it. Just Dr. Loomis says he's pure evil. He's got the devil's eyes. But they don't have to over-explain it. They don't have to get deeply into it, which so many of the sequels try to do. And revamps and remakes and legacy sequels. And we'll think of another term for it when they make the next one. So many different types of versions of this movie. But it's not that gory. It is the first popular slasher, we should say, because I know there's, for argument's sake, other slashers before that. He kills like 4 people. Brutally, with not a lot of blood.
I think the only blood you see in that movie is when he slashes Lori on the arm, when he's trying to cut her. And I think that's the only blood you see in the movie.
Everyone else is bruised or like laying weird when they show the corpses. Which is weird because I was thinking about this, like that scene where Lori goes up the stairs in the house and looks in the room and sees all her dead friends. In a modern movie, anything in the last 20 years, they would be like mutilated and missing body parts, and you would need to have the dental records to really actually identify them if this was a real life scenario. Yeah. But really, her friends are like laying there and hanging upside down, and Jamie Lee Curtis just sells it so well, of like how horrifying this is. I was glad I revisited that one.
I want to pose a question to you guys, all of you. Do you think that The Thing is a perfect movie? And the reason I ask that is because there are still so many people to this day. It is a cottage industry of people making YouTube videos on whether or not those two guys were the thing at the end of that movie. Like, so many people make videos about that. Still just trying to figure it out to this day.
I don't know if I'd call it a perfect movie because to me a perfect movie doesn't exist, but it's damn close to it. Like there are a certain tier of movies that are that close. Like Ghostbusters is up there, and I'd put The Thing up there. Would I say it's perfect? No, but it's in that upper tier.
Yeah, I say it's up there with like Terminator 2, like in that, that category of really great movies that just keep
and I feel like
for decades.
I feel like it's one that was more divisive on its release. It came out the same year as Spielberg did E.T., and I think people were much more drawn to see something like that than something as just gory and as weird body horror as you get in The Thing. And to go from talking about his restraint that we saw in Halloween versus we're going to show everything in The Thing is a dramatic, departure. But to Jason's point about building atmosphere, just the isolation and the paranoia and just the way that the score complements the psychological breakdown and the distrust that these characters have with each other it's phenomenal. The writing is so good, and I love that it doesn't leave you with that definitive cut and dry, this is what it is. It wants you to walk out and still be questioning it yourself. And for that, I think it's definitely one of Carpenter's best films. It might be my favorite Carpenter movie. So perfect. I agree with you, Derek. I don't know that perfection is something that's even attainable, but it is damn good.
I think it's perfect for what it is and what it's trying to do. I think for the type of horror movie it's trying to be, it's perfect. For everything it does, it's perfect. If you made a John Carpenter pros and cons list, there's no cons in that movie. It's pretty great. And some of the complaints we've had about his other movies, that's not happening here with The Thing. And it's funny because what you said, Jeremy, it wasn't well received upon release. That's one of the craziest things about film history is how no one liked it. Usually, when you look back and you find out a movie from a popular filmmaker did not do well, and people go, how could that happen? It's usually one or the other. It's either like, well, they got the box office success, but it's not critically high. But if they don't get the box office success, they usually get the critical success. When it comes to The Thing, everybody absolutely hated that damn movie when it came out. So it's very strange to watch even 40 years later how opinions change on a movie. And that's kind of, I think, helps his legacy a little bit, is the changing opinion over time of his movies. A lot of it's due to the fact that, like, we grew up on this on VHS and DVDs. And so we kind of had these movies buried into our brain and, like, close to the chest. But also, it's got to account for something when he had more misses than hits. If you want to look at the numbers, he kind of did. It's mostly Halloween. Escape from New York did well. Christine did good enough to let him make Starman, which did okay. Trouble banked, as in tanked, sorry. And his two cheap movies, Prince of Darkness and They Live, made their money back. And They Live was #1 in the box office for 1 week.
Did he do Firestarter?
He was supposed to do Firestarter. The Thing tanked so bad they fired him.
Oh,
and so they were like,
interesting.
all right, well, we still want you to make a movie, a Stephen King adaptation, because those were all the rage. I guess you can do the one about the car, because you can't mess that one up. And that one is pretty, not a lot like his stuff. It's a little bit Carpenter-y, but not too Carpenter-y.
I think that Roger Ebert had hated The Thing when it first came out, but then didn't he write a retraction like 15 or 20 years later? He wrote a whole article about how he was wrong for hating that movie.
I believe that.
He's one of the few critics who would revisit things like that. So I believe it.
Yeah, I don't know 100%, but I mean, props to him if he did.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like any critic today would do that, because
No.
if you never want to admit you're wrong
Correct.
in today's society. What about, and I think to go to your point, Chad, about more misses than hits, but I think the hits still stand the test of time so well that it takes away from the misses. Because like you mentioned with him being an economist, he was great at accentuating the positives and what he had to work with and hiding the negatives. Like in Halloween, little to no blood because he couldn't afford it. Well, you make up for that with great acting, great cinematography, and a really good script. And with moments that we're still talking about. You know, when I did my top 5 horror movie moments list a few weeks ago, when Jason mentioned the scene where we all think Michael's dead, and then he sits up in the background, is like one of the most memorable shots in any horror movie ever made.
Awesome. Yep.
Yeah. So, what about maybe some underrated John Carpenter movies in your guys' opinion? Like I mentioned Starman, just because it's so different to me than anything else that he's made. Jeff Bridges did one of his best acting performances as the alien Starman. So, Jeremy, we'll start with you. Underrated John Carpenter movie.
So subjective. To your point also about more hits than misses, I think we can all acknowledge, and for the listeners at home, making a movie is freaking hard. So like having less than half of your movies be not shitty is actually pretty impressive, you know? So props to anybody that can have, even if they've got that one hit and the rest of their filmography doesn't come together in the way that people would have liked it to. It can't take away from, I mentioned Tobe Hooper a little bit ago, kind of that situation. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is so seminal that whatever he did afterwards, it can't undermine that. So for me, and this is definitely going to be an outside the pocket pick for underrated, but John Carpenter did an anthology film where he actually plays essentially like the Crypt Keeper. It's called Body Bags. It came out sometime in the maybe 1993, something like that. It's a dark, comical, pretty much in the tradition of like Tales from the Crypt or Tales from the Dark Side. Morality plays, a couple short films within it. Definitely recommend checking that one out. It's a Halloween favorite for me.
I've seen Body Bags.
Chad?
I've seen Body Bags. That's it's really interesting. It's because it's like 3 segments, and he directed 2 of them, while also playing the host which I don't think he's ever done. He's never acted that much, even in his own movies. He's playing like this crazy coroner who, I don't want to give away the ending where there's a Toby Hooper cameo, but how they end his segments I found really funny. I mean, I have a ranked list that you guys made fun of me for, but I have it. And I had Prince of Darkness as my most underrated, but Jeremy's got me thinking. I don't know, man. If I want to go TV, if we're talking underrated, and I want to be the cool kid at the table and say something that you haven't seen, I'm going to say Cigarette Burns, his Master of Horrors episode, because for TV, for late '90s, early 2000s TV, the quality's pretty good. Norman Reedus is fine in it. He's doing a good job. He's serving the story, but it's actually a story very similar to In the Mouth of Madness. So he's still in that kind of like psychological realm. It's about a movie dealer who's got to go find an old, I want to say Italian film that was shown once, and the audience went insane, so it's illegal and you can't find it. But it gets into this conspiracy of is what was used to make the film actually evil in itself, that personifies this evil and spreads it out. So, yeah, I'll say that. I'll say Cigarette.
Good
yeah,
pick.
It's a pretty. That's it.
Jason?
I mean, I'm always going to say In the Mouth of Madness is a very underrated movie. I mean, just to be one of his best movies, and not a lot of people have seen it, but the people that do see it agree that it's a fantastic movie. Another one of his 90s movies that I think is better than most of the others is Village of the Damned. I really like Village of the Damned. I loved, it was one of the last movies that Christopher Reeve did before he had his accident. And who else was in Village of the Damned? It had Kirstie Alley in it, and
What?
Mark Hamill's in it.
Really?
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
Luke Skywalker and Rebecca?
I am
Yeah.
sleeping on this one, apparently.
But it is, it's worth a watch. I mean, it may be something that you might not like the first time you watch it, but it's like a lot of John Carpenter stuff. You might not like it the first time you see it, but it'll grow on you, because it's got that mood. Got that John Carpenter mood to it. If you like the John Carpenter moodiness, it's right up your alley.
Yeah, I like that one too.
I'll have to check that one out. I haven't seen that one. But I do have as we move on, I've got a John Carpenter trivia question for you guys.
All right.
I found this earlier, and it surprised me, but it also didn't surprise me.
Can I just say, take it away, Chad, before we even ask the question? Take it away, Chad.
Well, let's let him ask the question and see what it is first. I might be slinking out of here if I don't know this one.
Let's see. So we've named all these movies that John Carpenter has either directed, he's also produced, written, score, all that stuff. There's only one movie that he has worked on that has won an Oscar. Does anyone know what that movie is?
This would be so much easier if I respected the Academy for anything.
I know. Good point.
An Academy Award.
Award. Can I ask what category he won the award in? Or would that give it away?
Let's see. It won. I mean, I don't think this will really give it away, but it won Best Live Action Short.
Oh. Wait, is it the? Okay. I don't know. Okay, is it the original version of Dark Star, like the student film version, submitted as a short?
That's what I thought too, but no, that's not it.
That's a good guess.
I don't know if you guys have even
I
heard
don't know
of it.
short films.
It's called The Resurrection of Bronco Billy.
I've heard of it.
It's a movie that he edited in 1969.
Oh, okay.
Really?
He edited, co-wrote, and composed the score.
Oh, well,
Wow.
wow. Where can you see this?
Jeff, I have no idea. We need to look on Just Watch to see if we can find it. But the only other thing of his that was nominated, so John Carpenter was never nominated for Best Director for anything that he worked on. Jeff Bridges was nominated for Best Actor for Starman.
Oh, nice.
But
I didn't know that.
that's it. So, like you
I
said,
got to
if I
echo what
respected the
Chad
Academy,
said.
I wonder how they choose what wins and what
A
doesn't.
lot of it's let's do another podcast about that. Let's not even get into it.
Yeah, I mean that could
Let
be
me get it.
that could be its whole.
Let's spend another time preparing for that one because we're gonna need some time to prepare.
Yeah,
We
for
can
sure.
do it around Oscar season, Derek. That'll be fun.
Oh, that's a good idea. Save the date.
Okay.
Okay, so we actually had quite a few submissions for favorite John Carpenter films. I put a post out on social media asking people for their favorite John Carpenter films. So you guys up for me reading these off and get your guys' thoughts on them?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
All right, first up we have Brad Blanchard, who is a local filmmaker here in the Pensacola area. He said Body Bags is his favorite.
Right.
Love to hear it, Brad. I said Blad Branchard, and I apologize about that. I mixed our names up, but good choice there, buddy.
That could be Brad's cousin.
Yeah, for sure.
Our mutual friend Steve Wise says The Thing.
Heard of him.
Vaguely know who he is.
Wait, you heard of the thing or you've heard of Steve?
Heard of Steve Wise.
Yeah, the name sounds vaguely familiar.
I don't once or twice.
Samantha Diamond says Halloween and puts a little pumpkin emoji after it.
Nice.
Daniel Lackey.
Very appropriate, too.
Exactly. Daniel Lackey, The Thing. Adam Nelson, In the Mouth of Madness. And I'm still mad that
Nice.
there hasn't been a decent Region 2 physical release.
Yeah.
Kevin DeNovis, Escape from New York.
Good pick.
Michelle Ortiz Miguez, Escape from New York, The Thing, and Halloween.
That's my girl.
In that order.
Nice.
That's my girl right there. She's a buddy. Hey, Michelle.
Colton Sims says People Sleep on John's Vampires.
Yeah, disagreed.
I can't believe nobody picked Escape from L.A.
That
Yeah.
that was one of those late at night, came on TV, I have no idea what this is movie. I saw that before I saw Escape from New York. And that...
Is that right?
That might have been what did it. Because the idea is amazing. It looks like garbage from the CGI. But the idea is amazing, and that's still a great ending. Even though not a good
How
movie.
did they get away? How did he get away with making that movie? Because it's literally just Escape from New York.
Kurt Russell.
It's the same movie.
Kurt Russell made it happen.
Yeah, it
Kurt
is.
Russell's like, this is what we're doing. That's it. So everyone
He
said
just
yes to
took,
Kurt.
it's like he took the original script for Escape from New York, and he just scratched out New York and wrote L.A. And that's all they
What
did.
is it? Control H or whatever, and just swapped out.
Skim
Oh, and
through,
that-
replace any New York reference with LA.
Even for the time, the CGI is bad. I mean, it is like some like PS1 level graphics type of CGI. It's
Yeah.
horrible.
I can't imagine watching that movie in HD now, like if it came on TV.
It's bad.
Because I watched, I think it was the first Harry Potter on TV, and seeing all the CGI in high def, I'm like, oof, that's a little rough.
It's-
So I can't imagine how Escape from LA
A good
is.
30% of that movie is like watching an episode of Reboot. Like, just like the 90s 3D. Because it's just like, oh,
Yeah.
the glass is breaking. I'm like, you mean that triangle that's shaped gray? Yeah. The shards of glass?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Three more here. We've got Brandon Rutledge, who is a listener over at the Nerd Cave Retro podcast. He says They Live.
Love that one.
Raven Ghostpaw, Big Trouble in Little China.
Nice.
And this last one's for Jason, but Carlos Longoria, who's a listener of Nerd Cave Retro, but we like to call him I Am the Rampage. He says, El Diablo. This movie is one that I have a lot of nostalgia for. My dad was really into westerns, and this is a fun movie in general. I didn't watch much horror when I was young, so this was the first Carpenter movie I saw, and I am only just now realizing it.
I don't
And he
remember this
Bold
movie.
pick.
and he throws in
No.
the quote, "You shot him in the back. His back was to me."
That's a good
good.
one. That's very Doc Holliday
Yeah,
from
that's a
Tombstone.
bold-
Okay, I got a new John Carpenter movie to go watch now.
Well, here's
Yeah, right.
El
here's the deal.
Diablo.
John never made that. That's the script he's been trying to get made for 50 years and never worked out. So that's
Really?
yeah, that was pretty cute. Yeah.
Well,
That's great.
great picks from all of the listeners. That was really cool that everybody kind of weighed in and shared their thoughts on these, except for the gentleman that said vampires. Shame to you, sir.
For shame.
I'm only kidding. Thank you for the selections.
Yeah, absolutely. Always appreciate people sending in their list, favorite movies, least favorite movies, whatever I ask them to send. Always appreciate it.
And everybody out there, if you're going to check out John Carpenter stuff and you've never really seen any of his stuff, even people that like John Carpenter, don't sleep on Assault on Precinct 13 either.
That's killer.
That's
That's a good
great
pick.
70s crime drama. It's not horror, but it's definitely
It's a thriller.
definitely
I would
worth. Yeah, it's a thriller.
I'm surprised that just now came up.
I know. I didn't think about that. Like, because you think about horror when you think John Carpenter, it's hard to think of all like his other stuff that's not horror.
It's
Right.
It's funny how he's like known as the master of horror, and he's done the master of horror. And Jeremy, you mentioned how much Big Trouble is all a mashup of these different fantastic genres. I love John Carpenter for the sci-fi aspect of it. I love for the weird things he comes up with, which is amazing because all he does is make westerns. Let's be honest, they're all westerns.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So as we start to wrap up, I wanted to ask you guys this, and again, Jeremy, we'll start with you. What is the legacy of John Carpenter?
Yeah, Chad touched on it a little bit ago, and Jason, you've alluded to it as well. Everybody kind of has keyed in on the fact that we grew up with access to these films, whether they were on late night television, whether we had copied VHS versions of them that we just watched time and time again. When it becomes such a part of our DNA, like who we are as film fans. I mean, collectively, all of us love movies, and at some point or another, we all came across some of these films, some, if not all of these films, and you can see the way his legacy is already being carried over into these days. And I kind of joked and said most underrated to most overrated, but he really is having a reevaluation over the past 5, maybe 10 years at this point, where people that are actively making films, guys from their 30s to 40s that are actually out there doing the thing now, and you can see John Carpenter's imprint all over that. Plus, as we said, he's one of these filmmakers that does the writing, the editing, the scoring, and who else does that? You got Robert Rodriguez. There's filmmakers that have kind of like picked up the baton for him and ran with it, and we're kind of reaping the rewards of that with movies like I mentioned, The Guest, with there's other great examples that I'm not able to pull right now, but I just think that we're going to see his influence carry on for another generation, and then maybe it'll skip a generation, and then it'll come back around, but I think that people are not going to forget the iconic sound and the iconic style of John Carpenter and his work.
Chad?
Oh, the legacy of John Carpenter. That's easy. A lot of imitators for a very long time, and very few who are good. And that's kind of how you know someone's good at their job. The fact that we're all kind of obsessing over him. All he did recently, all he's been doing for 10 years is putting his names on things that, as a producer, that they've remade, and sometimes doing a score. And anytime he does any interview, we're excited to see him speak. It's on the night we're recording this, he's going to be on Colbert, talking about his TV show.
Oh, nice.
Which is cool. I'll definitely watch that tomorrow on YouTube. Uh, but I think really over time, what will stand out is just his originality. Even if we're like, this is cheesy, this is silly, this has been done before, this is that, this is a take on this is a riff on that. It's still all uniquely John Carpenter, and that's what makes it great. Only he could have made his movies the way he did, and I'm pretty happy to like exist at a time that I could see these, even though some are silly, some are a little bit too much. Um, there are a few filmmakers that I will like obsessively talk about because there's few filmmakers who have that kind of run of movies. And with that being said, do you guys want to hear my ranking list, or do we want Jason to go? And I can do it later.
Let's let Jason go, and then we'll come back to your list.
For John Carpenter's legacy, there are very few directors over the course of cinematic history to where you can see and hear, 5 seconds of a movie and know exactly who made that movie. John Carpenter is one of those people, and I also think he is too far ahead of his time because his movies weren't appreciated when they came out. They were hated when they came out. They flopped, but they gained notoriety later on, and that's also a testament to a guy who made as many movies as he did and was thrown in, Hollywood jail so many times, but he always stuck to his vision for the way he wanted to do things, the stories he wanted to tell. And like Chad said, even if it was cheesy, he did it his way. And he may, he's obviously a millionaire, multimillionaire just off of Halloween alone because he kept 10% or 20% of the gross. Like that's the best move he could have ever made because that movie cost $200,000 to make, and it made $50 million in the theater. So he's been making money off that movie. He doesn't need to do anything, but he still has made a ton of movies. They're all pretty much enjoyable at some level. Some are way up here. Some are, drive-in level trash, but they all have their something special about them. And I think like Jeremy said, he's going to be one of those directors that, is going to keep coming back, with every generation of filmmakers that come along and discover him and be like, man, this dude was the total package, man. Director, writer, editor, he could score. I mean, he could do everything, and he always did it under budget. Always.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback off that real quick, I'll say that there are very few filmmakers to me that, like Jason said, you can watch a movie and know almost immediately who he is. I think he personifies a type of filmmaker that if you want to set out and do things your way, if you have a specific vision, a specific style, I think John Carpenter's career and what he's done is a pretty good model to follow yourself after. Are you going to duplicate what John Carpenter has done? No. But you can take elements of how he's handled himself through his career. And I don't think you'll be doing too bad. Mm-hmm. So, Chad, would you like to go over your list?
Yes, thank you. It's a ranked list, but not in 1 to 10. It's more like a list of category to its counterpart. So
great.
It's his best movie. Let's start at the top. To me, his best movie. It's all conjecture. It's all my opinion. Best movie is The Thing. That's the best one. If we're just talking perfect. Not my favorite. I think there's a difference between a favorite movie and the best movie. If you want to say the best movie of all time is The Godfather, Citizen Kane, or Vertigo, or something, great. But is that going to be my favorite movie? No, my favorite movie is like Back to the Future, Ghostbusters, stuff I grew up with when I was a kid. So that's kind of where I'm coming out with that. I think his most successful is probably Halloween, especially with what Jason said, where he got a cut of the gross and has been having that for the last 45 years. Yeah, he's doing all right. I think the most beloved is Escape from New York. I think pretty universally, a lot of people have seen that. To the point where it's ripped off in video games. I think that's pretty impressive. Uh, the wild card slash dark horse, however you want to see it, to me is In the Mouth of Madness. To the first time a friend showed that to me, and they're like, "This is '90s Carpenter, which you don't hear a lot, and it's this crazy idea, and it's just like it's different than what he's done before." But there's also like some cheap tricks in it. The thing but did I ever tell you my favorite color is blue? And then there's just a filter over the screen, and Sam Neill's losing it. That is like the cheapest bit in a movie that I love. And the rest of it's good stuff. And the rest of the movie like looks so good, and it's just so great. I think it's also got his best acting in it. The scenes between Sam Neill and Charlton Heston are perfect.
Dude, I tell you, even to this day, when I'm driving down like a country road at night when it's dark, I'm expecting to see, a guy on a bicycle going by going, "He won't let me out. He won't let me out."
You hear the clicky clacky. The clicky clacky.
Yeah.
Yeah. My most underrated, I was going to say Prince of Darkness, but like from what we said earlier, I think Cigarette Burns is pretty underrated and not known because you kind of have to have. They didn't really release the Master of Horror series a lot. I think it was on Showtime, I believe. So unless you have it on DVD or an old Showtime subscription, or like so many weird movies now, things are on Tubi, which is really that's a whole conversation in itself. Talking about how Tubi kind of reminds me of Netflix 10 years ago, how it just has like the cool weird stuff that you didn't know you needed to watch.
Dude, let me give you guys a recommendation real quick because of that. On Tubi, there's this movie called Extraterrestrial that came out in like 2015. Go see it.
Okay.
Go watch it.
Okay.
It's awesome.
I'll watch it this weekend.
Sweet. And then last on my list, my favorite movie will always be They Live. It will always be it.
I was gonna ask. I didn't know you were gonna put the favorite on there. Had that in my back pocket. I totally, man. I don't know if the thing is so good also, but They Live is just. It's a cool movie.
It's so cool.
It's just a cool movie.
It's the coolest idea.
It's a cool movie.
It takes its time. That fight is insane, and
it's insane.
And Steve makes a point. I've talked to Steve Wise about this a few times. He says it derails the movie a little bit, and it kind of does. But then it just kicks back into gear so fast. And when they reveal what really happens, it gets the hell out of there and has like a pretty insane nihilistic ending, to where it's almost like a joke. And that's kind of informed my personality since then. So there we are. Yeah,
that movie is a master class on scoring a movie, and what you can do with 3 notes.
It's just the blues. He's just playing blues, but with like that 80 synth sound. So he sneaks blues in. It's different than like a lot of these like faders and other things he's got going on with like like the Fogs theme, which is like good and sparse and a little more complicated, but like it's just like, and a harmonica too on They Live. That's that. And the harmonica sounds a little bluesy, but it also sounds like Charlie Bronson in like Once Upon a Time in the West, because like Carpenter at the end of the day, he makes westerns.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think you nailed it. He makes all of his movies could easily be westerns.
Yeah. Oh, Snake Plissken's a cowboy. Jack Burton's a cowboy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they did make The Thing as a western. Oh, they tried to, and it's called The Hateful Eight. Like that's
I knew you were gonna say that.
And that's not even like a hot take. Like Tarantino screened it for the crew and cast with Kurt Russell sitting up front while they made that movie. That was a big influence on that movie.
Cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That's awesome. Last thing before we get out of here, Jeremy, anything you want to plug, like social media for the viewers and listeners to follow you?
Check out Lucid Memory on YouTube. If you want to hear some 80s, early 90s inspired synthwave music, get a little bit of that Carpenter nostalgia, check out Lucid Memory.
Chad?
When's the next time the feature's playing somewhere? You know more than I do.
Well, it's playing in Pittsburgh this weekend. Cool. Other than that, I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
well, we're working on it.
I'm still
So
waiting
if
on
you're
notifications.
local, like follow us on social media for the feature, because it plays in different towns now. I don't even know which one all of them play at. Hopefully, we'll get some more local showings this year, and we're still working on The Walker, which is going to be really exciting when that gets done. So keep an eye out for that.
Jason?
Well, you can go listen to me and Mr. Derek Diamond every single week talk about retro games over at Nerd Cave Retro. You can go to nerdcaveretro.com. That's the link tree that'll take you everywhere you need to go. And also,
OnlyFans?
yeah, we
All right,
Coming
excellent,
soon.
excellent.
and also my other podcast, Open Micers podcast, where me and my comedian buddy, Mr. Jacob Craig, every single week we talk to comedians around the country about what it's like being working comedians and all that kind of stuff, cool stuff. So go check us out at Open Micers on Twitter and Instagram.
OnlyFans coming soon for open micers.
All right.
Guys, thank you so much for taking the time to have this chat. This was awesome.
Yeah,
Oh, this is
Yeah.
great.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
me.